Our first session is a amazing story of meteoric growth as a business culture, and the HRD of Cognizant technology in EMEA, APAC, LATAM, and what they call just growth markets, which for them is everywhere. Pradeep Bhaskaran, he was our 2018 HR Director of the Year for the Enterprise Market for Profit category. And he's going to have an on-stage interview here with our own Debbie Bolla and with you. So allow me to introduce Debbie Bolla. Debbie and Pradeep.
Good morning, everyone. I don't carry business cards anymore. Is that a problem? I'm always like, bam, right on LinkedIn, but thanks. I wouldn't have won anyway, so no problems there. But thank you, Elliot, for the introduction. I want to tell you a little bit more about what he means by Pradeep's responsibilities. So he heads all countries outside of North America and India for Cognizant. So he started in 2007, which is, 12 years ago. And how many countries did you have? Do you remember?
Close to about 6 of them, Debbie.
Right. Well, I have 10, so let's bump that up to 10. I round up sometimes.
Okay.
Okay, so 6 to 10, manageable, right?
Right.
So during his tenure, how many do you have now?
Close to about 47 of them.
Yes, I had 46, but I figured it grew by the time I got to the stage.
Yeah, we got Israel now.
So he's in Europe, Middle East, APAC, and Latin America. So as the editor of the magazine, my first thought was, how do you manage culture? It's a lot of different countries, a lot of different complexities, but you want to make sure that there's a thread with employee engagement and the culture. So why don't you get that map up to show everyone what's going on?
Right, so Debbie, I think while preparing for this, I thought it would be good to help the audience understand the journey which we have gone through in the last 5 to 8 years, right? Cognizant has been in existence for about 25 years, 23 of which we've seen some phenomenal growth, right? Double-digit growth, especially in global growth markets. And I think through this slide, I thought I'll take you through a couple of stories and you can make your inferences of the challenges which HR professionals like all of us face, and what could be the potential solutions, and including the very important question which you've asked, Debbie, as to how do we maintain culture through these 47, 50 odd countries, right? It's a massive spread. We are very localized, we're localized to the tune of 80%, which means 80% of our workforce in each of these 47 countries are local. And the biggest fear which we have in management, which I have when I wake up every morning, is how do you make sure that every associate, we call our employees associate, has a clear understanding of the strategy, of the vision, has a very clear understanding of what we are trying to percolate to the lowest level, right? How does the communication not get disjointed or not understood by this population, across the globe? So quick understanding of, or a quick idea of what the HR leaders, across global growth markets are facing with. I'll start off with Argentina. Those of you who are from Argentina and who handle Argentina as a geography, the peso has fallen by almost 400%, in the last year. Inflation last year was in triple digits. This year it's close to about 65%. Our HR leads, are constantly working with business to make sure that our associates are taken care of. We come up with very unique, just-in-time solutions to retain our best of talent and attract the best, from the market. Because a slip there and it could be disaster, from us. And Cognizant is a very people-intensive business. So, story for you to be a lesson for all of us to be extremely agile. Do not wait for corporate to come up with decisions. You should be empowered to take local decisions and move in a very fast manner. Brazil, 97% of our workforce speaks Portuguese. And the language which we use in Cognizant, just like a lot of global corporations, is English. How do we make sure that they understand what we are trying to communicate across the corporation? And we've invested into a system, we call it Be Cognizant, wherein we load in all our communication happens through that site. It has a capability, it's a multi-language site, which means somebody out of Brazil can see the same messages translated in Portuguese, which is very, very important, right? The other big thing which we see in LATAM is union activism, right? We know that a lot of governments are trying to reduce the power of unions, and they're fighting back. So we see some sort of union activism, and we have to be extremely flexible and agile on the ground to make sure that we go through that transformation. Coming to UKI and Europe, great cities like Dublin, Amsterdam, Berlin, Stockholm, Oslo, to name a few, they're trying to establish themselves as the tech capital of the world. We're in a heavily, people-intensive business. How do we make sure we're able to attract the best of talent, from the market and also retain our high-performing associates is what our HR leads constantly grapple with, from a business standpoint. So the lesson from there, if you're going to wait for corporate policies to make compensation changes, if you're going to wait for corporate policies to make role changes for your workforce, I think you would lose your game. How do we make sure that our HR leads and business is empowered locally to make those decisions on the ground will go a long way in helping us succeed in those local geographies. The other big thing in Europe, what we see is, again, governments, countries like France, Germany, Benelux, parts of Nordics are unionized. We have employee representatives. We see a lot of governments, actually, again, working to make employment law much more easier. The other big lesson for us as HR professionals is gone are the time which we have some age-old solutions, which we have, which we can carry forward. If you're looking for structure, if you're looking for clear processes, etc., gone are the times for that, right? I think one of the biggest qualities, at least, which I see, in HR leads across geographies, is the ability to operate in gray, right? One of the other examples which I have, the pace at which technology is changing around us, right? In the year 2000, I think the amount of technology, the innovation which happened in the year 2000, by 2020 will happen every 48 hours, right? And by 2021, that's going to reduce to a couple of number of hours, right? And with that pace of change, it is very important to understand what has happened 10, 15 years back, but it's extremely critical to think on your feet and move fast. Moving on to Middle East, I think the current prince in Saudi Arabia is making some phenomenal changes, right, towards diversity and inclusion. I think we are partnering there in order to change our workforce mix as far as the Middle East is concerned. Our HR leads are very busy with that. When I look into APAC, the case study which comes into mind is that a couple of years back, companies like Cognizant, I think we had come into the radar of the government because we had become extremely large in Singapore. And Singapore very firmly believes in inclusion. I think they have government policies which dictates your workforce mix, in each of the, in each segment of business in which you are, right? So we've partnered with business, and today Cognizant is a case study, with the Singapore Parliament on how we have managed to localize in quick time in the last 18 months. Australia, an island, right? Dearth of digital talent. We've seen the market, the industry verticals like retail, banking, trying to catch up with the rest of the folks across the globe. Huge dearth of digital talent. Biggest challenge for us is to retain these digital talent and also hire locally, from the market. What we need to remember during these times, it's a lesson for all of us, is that compensation alone will not help us in these times, right? I mean, even if you pay somebody 40% more than the market, he or she will not stick around unless and until the work which they are doing is very relevant, and they say future from that work. I mean, we've got a great graduate program across a lot of countries. And we've seen this very clearly, coming in, from that population, right? One of the biggest demands is to have meaningful work. They need to make sure that the work which they are doing is relevant and constantly changing, right? They want to move from one project to the other as early as between 6 to 9 months, right? Gone are the times when we, used to have folks working on legacy projects for about, 12 to, 18 months, right? That period has reduced.
Yeah, they're looking to grow as fast as your organization
Grow
is.
fast and be relevant, right? I can see the fear in their minds when we speak to folks who actually leave us, associates who leave us. One of the biggest concern, or one of the biggest things they have is, hey, what I do today may not be relevant, 18 months, down the line. So how do I make sure that I'm relevant 24/7, right? I think that's the biggest fear which they have, Debbie.
Right.
Yeah.
So why don't you talk about how you've addressed some of these challenges?
Yes, a couple of things what we've addressed. I think it's a very knowledge-intensive industry. One of the biggest thing what we've invested on the last 6 months is a platform called Cognizant Learn, wherein we have invested into a cloud-based platform where close to it's a company of 300,000 associates. Irrespective of where this associate is based out of, he or she has access to all the learning platforms. We've also created a wrapper to improve the experience of our associates. I'm sure most of you would have heard of platforms like Degreed, Udemy, right? Coursera. So we made a wrapper around this platform where an associate with a click of a button can access these learning programs out of these 10 to 12 public sites. That's a big investment which we made in the last 6 months. Apart from that, be cognizant of the side which I referred to. Very important that every associate across the globe has access to information. We're going through a massive transformation as a company, as an industry. How do we make sure that an associate at the lowest level to the highest level has access to the same information in the language which they prefer to? We've invested into a common website where we post a lot of material where associates have access to it 24/7. It's also mobile enabled. You should understand that close to about 60% of our associates are actually partnering with our clients in client locations. So they may not have access to Cognizant systems. So very important that they have access in the mobile system, on their smartphones, etc. So that's something which we've invested. The other big thing, and I think Elliot referred to it yesterday, recognizing associates at the right time, at the right place. 300,000 associates, we realized it was becoming extremely cumbersome to reward and recognize our associates at the right time, especially at the pace at which things are moving. It's very important that we give this recognition on time. We've invested into a reward and recognition platform where a manager can actually celebrate great moments with their associates. And this actually is published across Be Cognizant so that the organization is aware of which associate has done a great job at some point of time. The other critical system which we've invested into Debbie is a pay and perk system. We realize so I think one of the things which we struggle with, we have great compensation and benefits systems individually, in Cognizant, but we didn't have a single repository where an associate could view his or her total compensation and benefits, right? So we have invested into technology enabling that. An associate can also log in and change the kind of benefits he or she wants in most of the countries. This is also because I think from a workforce mix standpoint, we've got various generations of workforce working in Cognizant. That's also going to become more complex in the future years. So an associate based on his or her needs can actually log into the system and change or ask for benefits what is relevant to him or her, Debbie.
So to just go back, a few things came up to me as you're explaining these programs. So first of all, how are they introduced to employees? And how are you tracking that they're being used? And do you get feedback on them? Because it's a lot of information. So with a learning program, are you encouraging people to access it? How are you getting them to access it? Because it's a big investment on your part, but you want to make sure the workforce values it. And what you brought up with the pay and perks is really interesting, and that's something we've seen moving, is outlining, look at how much you're getting from our organization. It's not just your paycheck, it's your benefits, it's your time off. So how are you engaging the employees?
Well, absolutely, Debbie, that's a great question. I think one of the things what we do is, I think today each time when you get on a flight, you get off a bus, you enter a store. I think the moment, if they have your mobile number with them, you immediately get a feedback after after you're done with your experience. We have a similar system, in Cognizant. Anything which an associate touches, he or she, has the ability to give feedback.
Great. Yeah.
Associate feedback is extremely important. It's practically impossible to gather physical feedback. We do have I would say the archaic form of town halls where we physically meet associates, but we use technology to gather feedback, especially considering the spread of our associates across various countries and client locations, right? So any process which we have, be it the performance management system, I think that's, and I think the critical aspect is taking feedback and ability to react at a very fast pace, taking that feedback into account, right? So one of the examples which I have is a performance management system. We used to have a yearly performance management system where associates used to have their feedback discussions with their manager once in a year. About 18 months back, we decided to change it.
Sure.
Now it's quarterly feedback, it's continuous feedback. We've also reduced the cumbersome nature of our performance management process. Initially, we used to have about 18 attributes which an associate used to be assisted. Now it's just 5, right? It's mobile phone enabled. Associates can track progress, feed in KPIs at the beginning of the year, change it every quarter. Since projects change every 3 to 6 months, they're able to take feedback from their managers as and when they complete a particular cycle. Debbie,
do you allow the employees to give feedback during their reviews?
So we've not achieved that level of maturity currently. They do give feedback in terms of how the system works.
Right, because you mentioned that, so I was thinking if you're progressing toward that.
Absolutely, but at a leadership level, at some senior level, that is CEO minus 4 levels, we have a 360 degree wherein it's feedback both ways. But we are evolving to using technology to evolve, wherein an associate can also give feedback on the manager, right?
Well, that's the world we're starting to live in, right? Like everyone wants to say what they think of things and provide ideas. And often if you're open to listening to them, you can get something great from employees.
Absolutely.
So what were we sharing next?
Right, so the other thing is, I think, what I also thought, is to maybe initiate a discussion with this group on the VUCA world, right? Everybody's heard about how volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous, the world is.
Yes.
Debbie, and I've got some personal experiences which I thought I would, share with you, right? So I think in one of our town halls, the HR town hall, when we had a virtual town hall, the question which I had posed to the HR group across the globe, close to about 250 professionals, is what is the major challenge which they're facing? I got everything. I got various things like performance management, compensation, reward and recognition, the pace at which business is changing, etc., right? And then I kind of articulated something which I had personally gone through a couple of months back during summers. We had a strategy meeting in New York, right? Landed in JFK. Temperature close to about 38 degrees. You were sweating, right? It was painful, being in the city of New York, right?
What month were you?
This was in June, right? June, okay. July, right?
Yep.
On the way back, landed in London, 35 degrees, extremely hot, right? I'm based out of Amsterdam. Reached there, 32 to 35 degrees. There was a water scarcity. I mean, I think rivers were, a couple of centimeters lower than what it should be because of the extreme heat, right? Went to Singapore, and this is all happening in a span of 15 to 20 days. Landed in Singapore, 40 degrees, extremely humid. On the way back, went to Kerala. I belong to South India, right? It's also called God's own country. If those of you who haven't visited Kerala, you should at the right time. Flood-like situation in June, July, right? A couple of villages and cities were actually inundated with heavy rainfall. Temperatures 38 degrees, and planet Earth was not designed with this sort of climate, right? Each geography, depending on the season, they had various seasons, and temperatures are supposed to vary in a particular month, but temperature is almost constant. Today, I think environment, a lot of, as far as HR professionals are concerned, it is there in some of our agendas, but in a lot of our CEOs' agenda, it's soon going to be the number one priority. We cannot continue to exist the way we're doing now. So I think as HR professionals, we have to start thinking about the impact environment is going to play in our lives, and see how our organization can support that. As HR professionals, I think we are great influencers. Mm-hmm. We cut across countries, business units, and I think it should be in our agenda to have environment as part of our KPI, KRA, something which we talk about in each of our forums, right? So I think that's something which was profound, which I experienced in the last 6 to 12 months, Debbie.
And it's an interesting point as we learn that more and more employees want to be aligned with company goals. So if you use that as a KPI, the environment, improving it, I think you'll attract a lot of employees as well.
Absolutely. And I think the millennials are also looking at purpose, right? I think, and it'll go a long way in addressing what they're thinking about, Debbie, right? The other big learning which I've had is that I had the privilege or the opportunity to visit the Great Wall of China. We had a HRT building exercise, where I had gone to Beijing, right? It's a phenomenal structure. I think it's close to about 22,000 kilometers long. Just to give you a perspective of how big this is, the distance from Dublin to Beijing is just about 8,000 kilometers, right? And the Great Wall of China is about 22,000 kilometers. It took a couple of centuries to build that wall. The building started, I think 2 centuries BC. That is, and between 1362 and 1644, I think the maximum, evolution of the wall happened. A magnificent structure, right? And when you look at it. But what we need to think about it, is it relevant anymore, right? Yes, as a structure, when you go to space, clearly stands out, but is it relevant anymore? So I think as HR professionals, we have to constantly think, at least it's got me to think, right? Whatever we have learned in the last 20, 25 years, yes, it's good to understand how we did it, but you got to think about the relevancy. Wow. The other big thing which caught on is, I think we had to, I visited the Louvre just below the Great Wall of China. And when I entered the Louvre, I had to use the barcode in my WeChat, right? Google doesn't work there, your WhatsApp doesn't work there, to pull out tissue paper. So if, as HR professionals, we are not in touch with technology, I think our basic needs are going to be extremely difficult to cater to our basic needs. And these are 2 things which stood out. The other big thing is, of course, the 100-year life. I had, again, the opportunity to interact with Linda Grayton last year at the London Business School. Very interesting lady, and I'm sure some of you would have interacted with her. She's published a book, The 100 Years, 100-Year Life, wherein the 3-stage life is already gone, right? We're moving into a 5-stage life, right? I think Elliot has organized for a big debate on the future of HR. I think it's going to be extremely interesting, right? And as I mentioned earlier, I think we have to have the ability or get into the mode of being okay to operate in gray without clear processes and structures. We will have to take breaks, from our lives, constantly reskill ourselves, think of what opportunities which we can handle, going forward. And retirement age, especially in a lot of countries in Europe, is anyway getting pushed beyond 68 to 70, right? With average age going to 100, I think we'll be expected to work till we are 80. And the final thing, the learning is that I remember 20, 25 years back, workplaces used to be extremely exciting, right? I remember 20 years back when I used to come to the workplace, you had access to the best of technology. Your friends were there in your workplaces. You used to spend 12 to 15 hours in the offices of every corporation. It used to be extremely exciting. But today, if you look at the external ecosystems where our employees work, which all of us are present, we have access to everything. I mean, Snapchat, WeChat, WhatsApp, you have movies, the click of the button. You have your friends who are available to you 24/7, virtually. How do you attract this workforce back into your physical spaces on your Monday morning? On a Monday morning. I think it's the biggest challenge which all of us have.
And the bigger question might be, do you need to? Or who do you need to? Because workers do have different preferences.
Absolutely.
And sometimes you have to meet in the middle, perhaps.
Absolutely. And I think there's a constant debate on, Debbie, as to the relevance of physical workspaces as we go forward. There is one group which thinks that, hey, we have to, the number of physical workplaces are going to dramatically improve. I'm of the opinion that it's all going to be virtual, right?
Right.
When I look at the workforce spread, I think one analysis shows that the number of contract workers, 2 years back was 70% lesser than today. I think initially you had at least technology contract workers based out of India, China, maybe a couple of countries in LATAM. Today we see the number of contract workers in Europe increasing dramatically. And that's because of the ability which technology gives them to work.
Enables them.
Enables them to work in any time zone, in any country, depending on their choice.
Yeah. Now, I can remember, and I'm sure all of us had one of those jobs where you would go in and you had a desktop and you would not necessarily punch a card, but you would sit, you do your work, and then you leave and your day's over. But nowadays, you just have access, as Pradeep said, to your phones, and I'm checking email when I wake up, before bed, at the soccer game, so it kind of enables workers to work where they want.
And the other thing, I think, big thing, before we move on to the next thing, is that I think as HR professionals, we have to make sure that how do we digitally, detoxify ourselves. We have a health and wellness program, and we constantly remind, our associates, our employees across the world as to how do they plug off, right? Mm-hmm. I think the other example which I want to share with you, recently I was having a conversation with one of the HR leads. I think Cognizant is going through a massive transformation now. Market is going through massive transformation, and she had planned her vacation a couple of weeks from now, Debbie. So the question was that should I postpone my vacation? And my question back to her is, when are you expecting normalcy? This is the new normal, right? So you have to get on with work, with life, as you have planned, to get some semblance of, a structure. But
and I would also ask, could you be productive without that vacation? People need breaks.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yep. But I think there's a lot of, I think work and life is getting intertwined, but I think we have to, do some
decompress a little bit.
Yeah.
Right.
The other quick quick messages I want to leave, with this group is that the first one is agility, right? I think in the morning I heard in the breakfast this was touched upon. I think we have to be extremely agile and flexible, in the way we operate. That's one. We touched upon, employee engagement. How do we make sure your workforce is engaged? We have communication channels in abundance today. As I mentioned, WeChat, WhatsApp, Snapchat. You have your company websites, but do not forget to communicate, right? Sometimes we have all this access to us and we forget to communicate with our associates, as simple as that, right? That's clear. I think creativity, right? I think today, individually, I think most of us may not have the solutions to the massive problems which we are facing. Right? You have to use the power of collaboration, and it has to be a collective effort, right? The kind of problems, the magnitude of problems which you're facing now, I think individually we may not have solutions to that, but collectively we should be able to have that solution. And I think you have to be creative, right? And creativity, I think, I don't have to preach to the choir. I mean, creativity brings about innovation. And the kind of solutions which will be there, we wouldn't have seen that before. That's one. Apart from that, diversity and inclusion. I think the workforce is dramatically changing. We've got various generations of workforce as part of our workforce, various cultures, languages, genders. Right. So I think as HR professionals, I think we have to make sure that our policies, processes which we create, are conducive to that environment. And finally, we have to take risks, right? I think today, your success will directly depend upon the risks which you take. I think yesterday, Megan, who won one of the awards, from HRO Today, very clearly articulated that once an opportunity comes up, you take the opportunity, and then you go ahead and find solutions. So you have to have a can-do attitude, Debbie.
Absolutely. We have a few minutes. Do we have any questions from the crowd? Anybody? Now's your chance. Oh, we have a couple. We have a mic coming to you.
Okay, so my name is Heba. I'm from Vodafone Egypt. So you mentioned how you've created online learning platforms for your associates to go and, what I wanted to know more about is the process or the approach of actually attracting those associates to go online, because not all of them are keen enough. They're still expecting the classroom training in a way, and they're also very busy in their day-to-day jobs, so they might not necessarily feel like they have the time to go online and experience the learning tools that you've provided for them.
Here's a great question, right? So I think, so let me give you a quick background, right? Close to 40% of Cognizant's workforce, right? We hire from, or we get graduates to join us, right? Both in India as well as other parts of the globe. I remember till about 12 months back, we had a very classroom approach, right? A very professor, teacher, student approach. We are changing the philosophy first thing as Cognizant is concerned. We are trying to make sure that every individual, every employee in Cognizant is responsible for his or her training program. So one is we are trying to make sure that because otherwise it's very difficult to be very prescriptive, in this environment. A lot of changes happening across these 50-odd countries. An associate or an employee who is embedded in the customer location understands the change which he or she, is going to go through. So we have tried to make sure that an employee has the power to select what he or she requires from a learning standpoint. The other thing is that we also try to make sure that employees do a lot of on-the-job learning, right? It's tied to that. I think the favorite two things which I can quote is that how much ever you learn the rules of boxing, it will not help you when you're going to be punched on the face, right? So you need to practice, as we on the job. The second thing is, I think Steve Jobs, the book on Steve Jobs, that's about 676 pages. But by reading that, does that make you Steve Jobs? No, it doesn't. So as a company, what we are trying to do is create some leadership programs. I'm just taking an example from that, which will help folks go through live training, on-the-job training, to have some qualities like Steve Jobs, right? So that's how I would put it.
Thank you.
And was there one other before we wrap?
Hi, I'm Sarah from Gulf Bank of Kuwait. I really love the graph that you've put up, the map representing the complexities in doing business. My focus directly went to the Middle East, and you had diversification. You will notice in the coming years, nationalization is also a big thing taking place in the Middle East. So how do you balance between diversification and then you also have regulation on nationalization taking place in that region?
Hey, great question, Sarah. So it's not only Middle East where we see nationalization happening. I think we're experiencing that in Switzerland, right? In Europe, we are experiencing that in a lot of European countries. I mentioned we are experiencing that in Singapore. Australia has tightened up its work visa rules. So we're seeing nationalization happening across the globe, including North America, right? And Cognizant, the way we have operated, I think our strategy has always been localization, right? To attract local, as I mentioned earlier, close to 80% of our workforce in most of our geographies are locals, right? And that's holding us in good stead. We can make better customer connects. And we also partner with various governments, like what we have done in Singapore. Now we're doing it in Saudi Arabia, Sarah, and I'm assuming you're referring to that, to make sure that our workforce mix is in lines with government, what government is trying to achieve. And finally, when you dig deep, why are governments doing that? Governments are doing that to make sure that the local employment is created, their citizens, get the first right of work. So I think we partner with a lot of governments to do that. The second thing is from a diversity standpoint, Cognizant is a big believer on diversity and inclusion. For those of you who have followed Cognizant, we just celebrated out of a workforce of close to about 300,000 associates, 100,000 of them are women, right? We celebrated that event, a couple of weeks back, across various geographies. And we clearly recognize that diversity and inclusion is the only way that we can make business units successful. So as part of our annual operating plan, as part of our KRAs, KPIs for our business leaders, they have a very clear target on what the diversity mix for their business unit should be. And that's tracked to them. And we also track things like pay equality. We also participate in government surveys on that, Sarah. So that's how we manage that, right? But yes, I think, most of the countries are becoming more and more inward looking. I think I would leave with you one example which is very relevant to Ireland. The Irish Navy, right? The Irish Navy is facing a shortage, of sailors, right? They've got a couple of, ships which have been mothballed, because what they've realized is as these new sailors or these new recruits, when they reach deep sea, they're not able to connect with their smartphones because of security reasons, because of whatever, right? And they're losing these sailors. These sailors are not ready to join the Irish Navy because of that. I think a lesson for us in HR professionals, I think we have to keep a close watch on technology, around us. I know a lot of companies, including Cognizant, sometimes we go overboard in restricting access to technology for our associates because of, various reasons. But how do we make the fine balance, right? Just imagine, if you get the story wrong, if you have to mothball a couple of your business unit, the kind of repercussion it can have. So I think HR professionals, I think, I would say today, it's not only the job of HR to take care of the talent. I think every business manager should have a component of HR, in them. But we shouldn't land in a position where we lose, touch of what is happening around us. And we become extinct, right? That's a message which I want.
We don't want that. So let me, please join me in thanking Pradeep.
Thank you, Debbie.